Hey there, fellow exiles, and welcome back to another video. Today is gonna be this video is gonna be the much awaited build guide for the Spark Semi-Autobomber, or how you might otherwise recognize it as a brand recall Arcanist brand Spark build. Now, initially when making this build, I was a little bit apprehensive about whether or not it was gonna work out and whether or not it was gonna be good. However, I do have to say this build has been an absolute banger. It has been way better than I thought it would be, and it has been super comfortable. Currently sitting at about 80 million single target DPS, maybe somewhere in the range of somewhere in that range with 3 hits of spark, where I believe it's like somewhere around 28 mil with just 1 hit on spark. And of course, in the best case scenario, you can get up to 4 hits, which is super nice. And I figured I'd open up this video with a little bit of a showcase. We could probably do like an uber elder or something. So let me just get some what are they called, decaying fragments. We can buy some decaying fragments. I think I only need 4. But yeah, so as we get into the build, while I showcase some while I showcase an uber elder, I can talk a little bit about the philosophy behind the build and sort of my philosophy behind build making, because it is something that I enjoy listening to other people talk about. So I figured, you know, if you want to kind of listen to that, then this is a nice decent time to talk about it. Basically, my philosophy when it comes to build making, at least with endgame builds, is that you can make a lot of different things powerful, and personally I like abusing different interactions that we only get access to within a single particular league. And so my general build making philosophy is that I like to make things as comfortable as possible, while also abusing something or the other that we get in the new league that makes something possible that was otherwise not possible before. So in this case, there are a couple of new things that we're using, namely the Whispers of Infinity amulet is probably the most notable one in this build. And so yeah, and then of course the Doriani mark, but I feel like everyone and their mother is abusing that one. So either way, build has been an absolute blast to play. As you can see, we're not the tankiest build, but we are pretty tanky. Recovery in combat is very high. Out of combat as well, we have about 1800 energy shield regen per second. So the recovery situation is really good. And when you're in combat, as you can see, I can pretty much stand in a lot of stuff. This is an uber elder again. I'm just standing. I think there's a shaper degen pool under me right now. And we have basically no issues. One thing I have seen be a bit of a concern for some people is that the build tends to be a little bit laggy. My PC is currently, my GPU is a 3060, and I'm basically on not the best PC specs. Thankfully, Spark is very optimized for high amounts of projectiles, so this is less laggy than other Arcanist brand variants that you might have played or seen in the past, which might be something like Eye of Winter or Rolling Magma. This is significantly less laggy than those builds. And yeah, the build's been absolutely fantastic. I've been mostly farming T17 strong boxes because I kind of enjoy the gamble. We landed a couple of mirror shard guards, a couple of unrequited loves. I've gotten a couple of Hinokora's lock cards. So the high end on those gambles has been super nice. And yeah, as you can see, damage is very comfortable. Defenses wise, we're also doing quite well. We aren't, again, a super tank, but 12k ES, decent amount of phase shift, along with just a good amount of recovery ends up carrying you a long way. So what is the build and how does it function? We will start off by talking about my decision for putting Spark on Arcanist brand, before we get into the whole recall aspect and what makes this super comfortable to run. So Spark, personally, is a skill that I've always enjoyed for a really long time. It's a duration-based skill, a duration-based projectile skill that kind of goes out. It lasts for a duration. If you get multiple pierces on it, it can hit multiple times. And it kind of just bounces around, as I can show you here. Like, your sparks sort of just bounce around. And traditionally, one of the bigger sort of scaling factors for Spark is getting some more numbers on that duration so that your sparks last for longer and therefore get more hits. The other thing that you really want on spark is projectile speed. So the reason that I chose to use spark with Arcanist brand is because it's a duration based projectile skill. The normal restriction of Arcanist brand with projectile skills, which says that projectiles from supported skills have 4.8 meters of maximum range. This is abusable with certain things like Eye of Winter for the purposes of return projectiles. However, what it does end up doing is it makes your clear speed a lot worse because your projectiles can't really travel like 2 screens further than you. However, Spark being a duration-based projectile skill actually bypasses this downside and it can travel infinitely. As you can probably see here, if I take this off and just cast Recall real quick, you can see my projectiles go all the way out to here, which is further than a screen away, right? So Spark isn't actually restricted by the same restriction that other projectile skills have just by virtue of it having a duration tag. Additionally, the fact that Spark scales duration means that I'm incentivized to get skill effect duration on the tree. And Arcanist brand is also a duration-based skill. As you can see, it has the duration tag. And the benefit of scaling duration in this case means that you have to place less Arcanist brands, taking us from a build that needs to constantly kind of place Arcanist brands every second to a build that only needs to place an Arcanist brand once maybe every 3 seconds. As you can see, I have 9 seconds of duration while detached and 5.8 seconds while attached. So between the two of those, it's about 16 seconds for whatever brand is attaching and detaching, and all the other brands lost for about 10 seconds. So we have a very, very good uptime on the brands and barely have to click buttons, therefore giving the build sort of its semi-Autobomber nature. Now, as for how do we actually deal damage, well, there is a very, very nice interaction that you guys have probably seen on some other builds, and if you haven't, I'll explain it right now, between Triggerbots and Brand Recall with Arcanist brand. So Arcanist brand itself is a trigger. As you can see, it periodically activates while attached, triggering linked spells. So by default, Triggerbots would double this trigger. So in a normal scenario, we'd go from 100% of our damage to 65% of our damage, which is 35% less, and that would then get doubled because it would get cost twice because each trigger bot would cost it once. So we'd go from 100% base damage down to 65% of our base damage, dealing damage twice for a total of 130% of our damage, aka trigger bots would be, in a normal scenario, 130% of our damage, aka 30% more damage. Now, there is another skill called Brand Recall. Brand Recall activates all your brands and recalls them to your location. So in this case, a brand activation for Arcanist brand is considered a trigger. So we recall each of our brands triggers, and instead of triggering once, they trigger twice, right? But again, at the moment, trigger bots would still only be about 30% more damage. The place where this sort of breaks down a little bit is the fact that you can link automation to your brand recall. And what this will do, if you read automation, if you read the automation skill itself, it says while this is active, supported spells will be repeatedly triggered. So that causes the brand recall to also undergo the same trigger condition that activates your skitterbots as Arcanist brand is going through. But because it's a separate sort of thing that's being triggered, you actually double dip in this case. So what ends up happening is you trigger your brand recall with automation. That gets doubled by Perfect Crime. But the less spell multi goes to the brand recall, right? But the brand recall doesn't do any damage. It just activates your brands, which then trigger your spells. So what ends up happening is you only get the 35% less damage once, but you get the double trigger twice because it double triggers the brand recall, which will recall all your brands. And then when each of those triggers, they get doubled again. So instead of just being a 30% more damage multiplier, aka 130% of our damage, I'm going to have to D&D here. We go to 260% of our damage, which is 2.6 times damage, aka 160% more damage. So that's like the big sort of that is the big mechanic here with this build in terms of how we're actually getting our damage output. Now, aside from this, the big problem that this build had and why I could never really seem to make it work in a normal league is Whispers of Infinity is kind of fixing this problem, is mana cost. Now, because of the way that Arcanist brand works, you have to spend the cost of the skill every time it gets triggered. And with Brand Recall, you spend a portion of each brand's cost. So you spend 20% of each brand's cost, which is the Arcanist brand itself, which as you can see is 37 mana without this amulet, right? So we would spend 20% of 37 mana times 6, but then we'd still have to spend the full cost of every single spark that gets cast from our Arcanist brand, because that isn't affected by the multiplier, because again, Brand Recall only spends the brand's cost. The actual skills triggered by Arcanist brand still spend their full cost, which in this case is 60 mana per cast of spark. And when you're casting 24 casts of spark, every time Brand Recall goes off, that ends up being about 1300 mana. And so for a normal build, what it means is even without Whispers of Infinity giving me reduced maximum mana, I don't even have enough maximum mana to cast it. So I wouldn't need to scale max mana and then not reserve any of my mana to even be able to afford to click Brand Recall one time. The alternative for this would be to run Eldritch Battery, but even if you were to do that, you would need at least like 3k energy shield on Eldritch Battery, and what that would mean is that you would be sacrificing a significant amount of your defenses because you'd have to be getting a bunch of energy shield pieces, which would then have to be allocated just for fixing mana and not your actual damage. The benefit of Whispers of Infinity here is it lets us completely bypass the need to go Eldritch Battery, which means we can still go CI and scale a really high energy shield pool to give us a lot of recovery to handle these mana costs. So this amulet is very, very, very strong. And it also gives us about 2.2k ES after percent scaling, which is a very big deal because the more maximum ES you have, the more recovery you can have. And therefore, since the mana costs or the energy shield costs in this case are flat, it helps mitigate that by a significant margin. So Whispers of Infinity is basically the thing that lets this engine sort of run, right? Now, beyond this, there was another way of going about doing this, which would be to use a battery staff, which is something that I have POB'd in the past. A battery staff is a staff with an implicit that lets you spend energy shield before mana for socketed skills. However, the problem with a battery staff is you don't really have access to projectile speed. And as I said earlier, Spark is, I would say on Spark, projectile speed is probably your highest priority stat. It's your number one. You have to get it wherever you can get it. With all of that out of the way, how do I actually scale my damage beyond just getting these triggers? Because after all, Brand Recall has a pretty long base cooldown. It's got a 4-second cooldown. So the first thing that we do is give Brand Recall as much quality as we can, because as you can see, Brand Recall has CDR, both on the gem and within its quality. So we get a level 4 enhance attached to our Brand Recall. And the benefit of doing this as well is that it also adds quality to automation support. Automation support also has a cooldown recovery rate. So between the two of these, we're already at about 111% increased cooldown recovery rate, which brings down the CD significantly. Alongside, we have this mastery for 50% increased Brand Recall cooldown recovery rate. And then we are also getting a couple of these clusters, which bring us up to another 40% CDR between the two of them with the chip away keystone. So we end up getting a significant amount of CDR down for this Brand Recall. And currently with our brands down, I believe it's 1.17 seconds, which is super, super nice. It ends up rocking once every second. So it's very, very frequent and it's very, very consistent and lets your damage feel very, very comfortable. Outside of this damage scaling, we are, of course, going for the normal crit sort of setup where we are scaling crit and crit multi. I am getting power charges as well as frenzy charges from my Elegant Hubris using an impossible escape from Mind Over Matter over here. And yeah, that's about it. We are scaling a little bit of brand duration. We are, of course, getting a ton of projectile speed. on the build for Spark. I am running Spark gloves. The reason for this, as I will speak on later, is so that I can run a 6-link animate guardian so that he doesn't die. And we are getting a couple of pierces here as well, just to make our clearing feel a lot better, along with some more projectile speed. And that's sort of the basis of most of the build. Now, one additional thing that I did opt for is to get Remarkable on these 2 clusters, which gives us a 70% chance to drop 2 brands. I did initially have 3 of these, however, I found it unnecessary because of how little I need to press anyway. It doesn't really make that big of a difference. So I am still running 2 Remarkable clusters, which does help a significant amount. Defensively speaking, we have a large amount of ES, as you can see, 12.5k ES. We are also suppress capped. We have 90% max resistance, along with about 16k evasion, which is, of course, super, super nice. And just a very, very insane amount of recovery between Overleech with Ghost Reaver and Trickster Ascendancy. Very large amount of recovery there. We also have about 1800 ES regen with, right here, as you can see, 1868 ES regen with Zealot's Oath, which we are getting through a flask suffix. We are getting, I have small regen rolls on some of my clusters. As you can see, 0.1% regen per second there. Then I think a couple of my mediums, yeah, 0.1 and 0.1. I have a few regen rolls here and there. I'm also running a Rational Doctrine with make sure that strength is your highest attribute, because even though we're doing Supreme Ostentation, you still want strength to be your highest to enable Rational Doctrine. And this also gives you a nice amount of regen coming from Consecrated Ground, which will be permanently on your character. And just, yeah, small amounts of regen. We have a little bit of regen here as well, almost 1% regen over here. And all of that ends up adding up very, very quickly, another 2% from this mastery. In addition, also running a gain energy shield on Hit Watcher's Eye with Discipline. This is very, very strong. When you have this many sparks flying around, this ends up being about 1400 extra recovery per second, which is obviously super, super nice. So definitely pick up one of those. I also opted for a flask charge when you critically strike while affected by precision, just because of how strong of an interaction it has with Mage Blood. Now, when I brought this up on stream, apparently not many people were aware of this tech, so I figured I'd share it in the video. This is one of my favorite things to do when I'm running a Mage Blood build that is very, very much has a single flask or a unique flask that you want to have 100% uptime on, even on single target. So I'm talking stuff like Bottle Faith, Progenesis, Dying Sun. This Watcher's Eye mod is completely broken. So by default, it has a cooldown, an internal cooldown of about 0.1 seconds. That goes a little bit higher, I believe, because of server tick rate. But the base cooldown is 0.1 seconds. And what that means is you can typically give 10 charges to flasks every 1 second. However, in a normal scenario, this is split between all 5 of your flasks. However, when you're running a Mage Blood, you have Enkindling Orbs on all your flasks, which prevent them from gaining charges. So none of these flasks can gain charges. And so what ends up happening is the Watcher's Eye mod for precision all gets funneled straight into your unique flask, which means this unique flask is getting about 7, I believe with the server tick rate and everything, this unique flask gets about 7 charges per second while I'm on single target, which is obviously a very, very big deal and leads to Bottle Faith basically having 100% uptime even in a single target scenario, which is super, super nice. Now, with all of that aside, I am running some auras. We have Summon Skitterbots, Purity of Fire, Discipline, and I am also running a Precision. Precision is specifically just for the Watcher's Eye. If you are going to run Precision, you need a 2% increased Mono Reservation Efficiency Jewel. If you aren't going to run Precision, you don't need this. We have our guard skill setup. Of course, the super enhanced brand recall. I also stuck Convocation in here just to keep my Animate Guardian on top of me, as well as the Triggerbots on top of me, because sometimes you'll run a map with like minus 95% minion movement speed. So the Convocation is really nice for just keeping them on you in those maps, and it actually fixes basically the entire map mod. And then I also have a 6-link Animate Guardian in here, along with finally my Spark setup. I am running Awaken Elemental Focus in here because I opted to go for Skitterbots, mostly because we don't really have any other damage auras. So Awaken Elemental Focus, very, very strong support gem, about 50% more damage. In terms of gear, mostly just going for as much ES as I can. Double T1 ES and 50% global defense here. Triple T1 ES here. T1, T2 ES on the boots. And the gloves, unfortunately, don't have ES because these are basically just spark gloves with faster projectiles, faster casting, crit multi, and crit chance. The faster casting doesn't actually affect your damage. However, I would still get faster casting here just because it makes your brands place a lot faster, which obviously helps a lot with the playstyle of the build. So you could probably go for even a tier 3 faster casting roll. It doesn't matter that much. Just make sure it's on there so that your brands have that nice cast speed on them. In terms of suffixes, mostly just resistances. You will need a T1 suppress roll on your body armor and your boots. And then you can just benchcraft suppress onto your helmet because, or vice versa, you know, benchcraft onto your boots and get T1 suppress on your helmet. Either one works. But just make sure that you're getting that amount of suppress from your gear. That plus our quartz flask plus these nodes right here for inveterate end up getting us suppress capped, so that is also super strong. In terms of implicits, we don't really have a good Exarch implicit on our Lich's Circlet, unfortunately. There's not really any good ones, so we just go for flat lightning to spells and 7% of physical taken from hits as chaos. I also have maximum fire resistance and purity of fire increased aura effect along with maximum resistance on the boots, just to get our maximum resistance to 90 along with a melding of the flesh, which I currently have forgotten where I placed right here, along with a melding of the flesh. That gets us to 90 max fire res, which pushes our other resistances to 90 as well. One thing to note here, if you can get 2 wands with +1 all skills, that will push your purity of fire to level 23, which will mean that you no longer need Purity of Fire aura effect here because you'll get +1 max res from Purity of Fire being level 23. And then you can switch this Purity of Fire increased aura effect into physical damage from hits taken as chaos, which will make your phys hit a little bit stronger, so do keep that in mind. Outside of that, we are running Supreme Ostentation, getting a bunch of ES tattoos onto our intelligence nodes, and then also tattooing some projectile speed onto our dex nodes. Obviously, very strong. Do remember to tattoo this small dex point. It is a sneaky point inside our unnatural instinct that you will get. This one is very important to tattoo because this will also bring your dexterity underneath your strength for the purposes of your rational doctrine. So definitely look out for that. Outside of that, also running a helical ring. This is very badly crafted. Please don't look at it. The only relevant stats here are global crit multi, elemental resistance, and energy shield. I would highly recommend not missing a 75% chance to fracture if you are like me. And yeah, in terms of weapons, we're doing essence, lightning damage to spells +1 and unveiled spell damage along with a projectile speed fracture and global crit multi or spell critical strike chance, whichever one you land on a reforged crit, and then finish with crafting the other one. I would highly recommend getting yourself a prophecy wand instead of a profane wand. It is slightly more damage and these bases are a lot cheaper. The profane ones were about 14 div. The prophecy ones are about like 20 C. So would highly recommend just getting these as your bases instead. I will probably be recrafting on these at some point. So again, definitely get yourself a prophecy wand if they are cheaper. And yeah, I think that's about it for the build. There's not much else here. We are, of course, running one step ahead. This makes us action speed immune. Which does remind me, I have to talk about ailment immunity a little bit. All I've opted for is shock immune because one step ahead already makes me freeze and chill immune, and ignites don't really deal a lot of damage when you have this insane of an amount of recovery and maximum resistance. Even inside minus max maps, I haven't felt it at all. And then Scorch Brittle Sap just generally don't show up very much, so I'm not really bothering for that either. However, because we do have a 100% chance to avoid being shocked, you can go for replacing one of your rare jewels with a Storm Shroud. That is completely fine and completely up to you. We are also running Swift Killer just for the +2 max frenzy charges. Currently, Polymath would only give me about 10% more damage, and we've already got Recover ES on kill on Soul Thief, so I just didn't feel the need to go for Polymath, so I ended up going for Swift Killer. You can also go for Heartstopper. Heartstopper is very strong, and that is definitely an alternative. However, I personally prefer to go Swift Killer. Another alternative there is you can drop Ghost Reaver and then go for Spellbreaker instead. This would save you a couple of suffixes in terms of suppress if you're if you're struggling a little bit with your res capping. That is also definitely an option you could go for, so do keep that in mind. Spellbreaker, of course, being very, very strong, and if you do that, then you could also opt for going for Wicked Ward. That would also definitely be something that you can do. It would be about 3 points, and then you can spec Throat Seeker instead. That would definitely be a play. Now, before we move on to the Animate Guardian, I do want to show off my Mercenary. This is a very typical Mercenary setup for a Doriani Merc. I am running a Fallen Reverend with Zealotry and Wrath. We have a Doriani's Prototype along with a Hypnotic Spiral Cogwork Ring, which is basically just minus Lightning Rise and damage taken recoup his life. Very strong, brings his resistance all the way down below 200. Now, for some people who are wondering why their Calandra's Touch is bugging out on the Merc, for some reason, you have to place the Calandra's Touch first inside the Merc inventory. Otherwise, sometimes it bugs out. I think I'll have to go into a zone here to show you guys. If you place your rare ring in that inventory first, it bugs out the Calandra's Touch. As you can see here, it's only got -76, which is a little bit weird. So just make sure that you place the Calandra's Touch in this window first, and then place your rare ring, and then it'll go to -200. I don't know why it works that way, but ever since I did that, the Merc has had 0 issues with the resistances. So do make sure that you do it in that order. For Helmet, I'm running Wilma's. This is just to make him reflect immune with Ancestral Bond. Gives him a little bit of regen. The boots, just resistance boots, high resistance boots. Get chance to avoid being frozen so that he doesn't freeze. So he's always moving around and always able to attack. Defiance of Destiny, basically just give him more survivability. Replica Victorios, this is mostly for endurance charges. They are not up 100% of the time, but they're up most of the time, and that's what matters. So, especially with our 200% charge duration from Trickster, so these endurance charges, very, very nice. You can also just opt for more aura effect if you want. So that is also another option, but I just find this to be a really good shield because it gives 10% aura effect and gives you endurance charges for a vast majority of the time. For a weapon, just running a scepter, 40% increase zealotry effect, fairly straightforward. Belt is Calm's Binding, got zealotry effect here, along with nearby enemies convert a percentage of their physical to fire, just helping bolster our physical damage defenses. And then for gloves, finally, I'm getting Unnerve as well as Calling Strike. This is a nice DPS boost. And for the few people who are asking on stream, yes, even with Ancestral Bond, your Merc can still call as long as he's hitting. So that's what's important. Now, to show off the Animate Guardian, I will hop over to POB real quick. Now, do keep in mind that I will keep all of these POBs and the image for the Merc in the description below, so you guys can reference that if you want to take a look. This is our Spark POB. Let me just find, where's my Animate Guardian POB? Is this it? That is not it. I thought I had an Animate Guardian POB. I must have forgotten it. Oh, wait. It's inside my spreadsheet. Oopsie. You guys are gonna have to wait a minute while I just search this up. That's my bad. I should have prepped this beforehand. Sorry about that. But let me just open this up real quick. And you guys can have a peek at the Animate Guardian right here. Okay, so the Animate Guardian gear is fairly straightforward. Now, do keep in mind we're linking him to things like Elemental Army, so he already has a nice base amount of resistances. However, we are running Oromvorax. This is for just a ton of resistances. The main purpose of our Animate Guardian is to just give Garb for nearby enemies cannot deal crits. That's probably the most important thing here, so just get a nice Garb of the Ephemeral on him. We run Southbounds just for more life. This gives them 22% increased life. Rainbow Strides for some spell block, and then running a shield with Recover on block. Synthesis implicit crafted with Loathing Essences for T1 spell block. So this pushes his block chance to about 30 or 40%, and his spell block to about 35%, which is super nice. As you can see, 42% chance to block, and between this and the boots, we're at 35% chance to spell block. So nice amount of recovery there. We do have a glimpse of chaos when nearby enemies have malediction. Make sure that this helmet doesn't have enemy or chaos resistance is 0, because that will screw over your Animate Guardian's chaos res. You definitely want him to have some chaos resistance, so make sure that line isn't on here. And yeah, that's it for the Animate Guardian gear. Now, if you do find your Animate Guardian dying, which in about 160 T17 maps, which I am rolling them pretty dangerously at this point, in about 160 of them, my Animate Guardian has died precisely 2 times. In that amount of maps, my Animate Guardian has died twice. If you do find that he is dying more, if you are running harder content, all you do is you unspec Heartseeker and you spec these 3 points for Decay Ward. Now, these points are kind of nice. They are inside a lighter meaning. They are inside our light of meaning. They give about 300 ES, as you can see here. But the big thing here is these nodes will block cap your Animate Guardian or bring him very close to it. We will go from 42% chance to block to 72% chance to block, and a 35% chance to block spells to 65% chance to block spells. And it gives him an extra 2% recovery on block. So this will push his recovery on block from 5% to 7%. So if you find him dying, just spec these nodes. He will probably never die again. Just straight up. If you think he's dying more often in whatever content you're running, switch to these nodes. He will never die again. I haven't found it to be too big enough of an issue that's warranted. However, again, if that is something that you're struggling with, you can spec these nodes. In addition to that, the benefit of doing this is that you also have access to the Convocation has 40% increased cooldown recovery rate. Mastery, this will obviously make him be on you more often and also help your Triggerbot stay on you. So this is definitely also another option that you have. And yeah. Anyway, that is about it for the build. I don't think there's much else to say. Final little tidbit that I would like to leave you guys with is calculating your damage. Simply put, you would take I could like put a small, this is how I calculated earlier when I had about 798,000 damage. But straight up, the easy way to do it is you would take your hit damage. So in this case, or I'll just write it down here. You would take your hit damage multiplied by Brand Recall casts per second, which your Brand Recall casts per second is equal to, this would be hit damage times Brand Recall casts per second. Hold on. You take your hit damage, multiply it by your Brand Recall cast per second, plus your hit DPS would be equal to your 1 hit damage, your 1 hit DPS with Spark. And then multiply that for would be your 3 hit DPS with Spark. And to calculate your Brand Recall cast per second is also fairly straightforward. If I go over to Brand Recall here, we would basically take this number right here, which would be the effective trigger rate on Brand Recall. Now, it is easier to do this in game because in game it gives you a more accurate tooltip. In my case, it's 1.17. So if you want to calculate with that, you would take 1 divided by your skill cooldown would be equal to your effective trigger rate. And yeah, that's all you need to know to calculate your damage. As long as you do these steps, you get your Brand Recall times your hit damage, and then add in your hit DPS right here for 1 brand. That will be your hit total, hit DPS. So in this case, we would do 1 mil times 24. Oh, right. I also have to add in the 24 here. We would do 1 times Brand Recall cast per second, which is 0.84 times 24. 24 is the amount of sparks that get cast every time Brand Recall goes off. And then we would add in this 7 mil right here, and that would give us our 1 hit DPS, and then we would times 3 that for times 3 hit DPS. And yeah, that's about it. I'm going to end the video there. Thank you guys for watching. Sorry if my voice has been a little bit off today. I am a little bit sick, and uni has just started up, so I'm also very, very tired. I just figured I wanted to crunch out this video because there's a lot of people who want to play the build, and I'm really excited about this one. I love this build really dearly, and yeah, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.